Good afternoon, everyone. I think it's time to get started. It's good to see that some people defied the summer and still showed up for a webinar. I can tell you that it's warm enough here that I would feel better sitting somewhere outside under a tree drinking a cocktail than talking about imposition software. But I think we still have an interesting hour-long webinar planned for all of you. So let's get started with that. And if you have any questions, as always, you can ask those in the GoToWebinar control panel, and I will either answer them immediately if I happen to see them while I'm talking, or I'll come back to them at the end of the webinar. This webinar is about Imp, which is software from InSoft or Metamation. Well, what it is imposition software, but simply calling it imposition software is not really doing it justice. It actually goes quite a bit further than that. What I want to do is a short introduction. I have some slides on the three main topics that I want to cover, which is bound, Diecut, jobs, and then ganging. And then we'll have time for wrap-up and questions. I have some slides. We'll see how much time I spend on the slides, because I also want to show you the software. I think that will be more interesting than staring at slides with screenshots on them. So what is it? Well, first of all, it's one of those exceptions in our four-piece portfolio. It only runs on Windows, not on Mac. So it's a Windows software that does automated layout planning, which basically summarized means that it creates the most effective layout plan it can find for particular jobs. And then it also, of course, does the actual imposition. But it does those two aspects, and I think it's important for Imp to realize that it actually does do those two aspects. And what kind of jobs? Well, on the one hand, bound jobs, but you can also handle label or packaging die-cut jobs. And then it does ganging for both rectangular and non-rectangular jobs as well. And again, those are the three main topics, and those are the things that I want to show you in a little bit of detail as well. And why is it then special? There's a couple of things, and I think you'll see that as we go through the demo. There is actually a very high focus on the planning aspect, and even more so on automatic planning aspect. And that means that once the configuration is done, so once you've told the software what kind of machines you have and so on, that it will give you the most cost-effective option to do a single job or a ganging of jobs, and it's actually quite fast in that regard. You can still interact with it manually afterwards, so you could do an automatic layout for a plan and then intervene manually, but the focus is very much on the fact that you can do a lot of things fully automatically. And there is no need for separate imposition software. It really combines this planning and imposition software. And amongst the automatic optimizations, and we'll see many of the ones that are mentioned here, because you can tell it all of the details about the presses, but also the finishing equipment that you have and the materials that you have and so on, it can do a lot of intelligent things during that planning and optimization process, and it really comes up with very smart alternatives to do a planning. And it can plan across all presses that it supports, from sheet fab to web presses, or any mix of those devices that you have. So if you want to see what the most effective option is, and you have a number of different output devices, then it will do so in a very quick and convincing way. And there too, and I have to remember to show you in the demo afterwards, but there too, you can do the planning part automatically, but you could still then intervene manually and say, oh, I need this die-cut maker and not one of the others that I have, and then it will tell you if that's not the most affordable option, the most cost-effective option, it will tell you how much more that change, that manual change that you do, would cost for that particular job. And then the fact that it supports ganging for all these kinds of different jobs, whatever the shape, and that there are a number of optimizations during that ganging of different jobs together is also one of the things that are special. And then secondly, and this is something that I'll show, but of course it's more obvious if you would use this in a real production environment, there is a database that Imp can talk to. You don't need to have that, and you can use it as a standalone application on simply one workstation. But there is database integration provided as well, and that database is a database for storing products and plans on the one hand and storing die-cut shapes on the other hand. What do I mean with jobs and plans? Well, if you have someone in the planning department who does cost planning of a job and wants to know what the possibilities would be, how much that would cost, and so on, they can use Imp to calculate an actual plan for that particular job that they are working on. And they can simply check that into that database. The prepress department, on the other hand, can check out that same job from the database and add the PDF file or PDF files to it on their end once they've received the final files, and then go through with the printing. So that database forms one of the important connections between planning and imposition or prepress departments in this case, and it can be used to store any aspect of a product or a plan that you have worked on in there, and then to simply recall it at any later point. And because the database doesn't have to be on the same machine as where Imp is, that database could be central to your company, and it could allow cooperation between different people working with Imp. The fact that the database can also store die-cut shapes is important as well, because that means that every time you have a die made, you pay for a die, you can actually save the shape of that die in the database. And if you have a later a product that you have to do for a customer, it is possible from within Imp to check that database and get whatever matches. And it don't even have to be complete matches. It can be other die shapes that come close to the shape that you already have in the database, and so for a die that you had already created. And of course, the fact that you can find these can be a serious cost optimization as well. But I'll show that a little bit as well as we are going through the die-cut demo. But let's start with traditional bound jobs. And as I said in the introduction, Imp allows you to select multiple machines from the configuration that you've made. You can have one, and then it will only look at that one machine. But if you have four, as in this example, it will actually try to find solutions for all four machines. And then based on what you've selected, it will present you with a number of plans. And for each of those plans, it gives you the total cost of that option. It gives you on which machine it has done that and what the sheet sizes are and so on. And for each of those, it will automatically also calculate all of the signatures that you would need to do that. And you can even already see on the screenshot that it takes into account warnings as well. It takes a whole range of things into account, and if it finds something that could cause a problem, like cutting complexity in the fourth example I have there, then it will already highlight that in the options that it gives you. It's up to you to choose an option. If you want to use a particular machine, then at least you know that the total cost is going to be much higher if it's not the most cost-effective machine. But you can still choose what you want to do. And once you select that, it will create all of these signatures for you as well. So in this whole process, and I hope that I'll be able to show that in the demo as well, in this whole process there is very little manual work that needs to be done. It's all very much automated, and of course that's good from a time perspective, but it's also good because it will stop you from making mistakes in the work that you're doing. Now, once it's done the optimization, or the imposition actually, and you've selected the plan and so on, and you've put the PDF files in there that you want, then you can either export all of this as JDF, populated or unpopulated. So if you have a workflow system running behind this, then you can simply create the JDF that is necessary. And then you also have the choice to create an imposed PDF. So if I've created this this plan and the signatures that belong to it, I can import PDF information into that. I'll be able to see on screen what that gives, and I'll be able to save a fully imposed PDF out of there as well if I can't use JDF or prefer not to use JDF for a particular job. Gives you the option. And then some more guidelines, or some more highlights actually. There are dynamic templates for sheet and reel feed presses, templates meaning sheet templates, for example, with all kinds of marks pre-applied to it. There is a wide collection of marks that you can add to this. It does spine calculation automatically depending on all of the factors that you have to take into account, which signatures you've selected, what paper you've selected, and so on and so on. And if you change anything in a product, it will also automatically adjust the spine sizes and so on for you. So again, it really focuses on taking care of as many as the details in a fully automatic fashion. And then another detail perhaps, but not so much if you need it, it supports, of course, left binding, but it also supports right, top, and bottom binding. So if you have products that need that, then this is also fully supported by Imp. Okay, let's see if we can make the software do what we just said. So, working in a virtual environment, of course, because it only runs on Windows, as I indicated already. So that means I'm running parallels here. My apologies, I'll need a drink once in a while. I have a bit of a cold, which is an accomplishment when it's 30 degrees outside, but I managed to do it anyway. So I have Imp launched already on my virtual environment, and I also have this database background process that is running on the machine. Now, you won't see that again. Imp will simply talk to it when it feels a need to do so. As I said, it can run without it. It doesn't need that database to be there, but it can take advantage from it if you do have it installed. Now, I wanted to talk about bound jobs, and what I will do is I have a folder here called demo, and in there I have an XML file that defines such a job. And I have a PDF file with the actual content for it. And what we'll do is we'll start with the planning aspect. So if at some point from an MIS system or from an ordering system, you can export product information in an XML format, then I can in Imp go to import and then product from XML file. And let me see if that's the one that we want. Yes. So we just select that XML and we import that. And the window that I get here shows me all of the bound components. It also shows me unbound components, a cover in this case. So I have the inside pages and I have the cover. It read from the XML file what the paper needed to be in all cases, what the number of copies needed to be, and so on. And then I have a section at the bottom that says plans, and that is still empty. Okay, So it is still empty, and before I actually go and plan something, what I will show you is that planning uses this configuration information. And you find all of the configuration information in the configuration editor, and it's actually quite simple. It contains the materials, the presses that you have, die cutting, die making setup, and then finishing options as well. And if I look at sheet-fed presses, for example, then for each of those presses, it will define all kinds of different parameters that can have an effect on the cost of a product produced on there, and that also is needed to evaluate whether a particular imposition will work for a particular machine. This is perhaps the most important part of IMP, and certainly if you would want to do a trial of the application at some point, then having this configuration information there and having it correct for the equipment that you have is of paramount importance. If you don't do this correctly, then all of the other things that you can do, all of the automated processes and checks and balances that are in IMP will not work correctly. So this is very, very important that you set it up in a good way. Now, machines are relatively static. You're not going to buy a new press every week. So this is simply a manual process. You have to go through the machines that you want to use for IMP, and you have to fill out all of the details. You can clone an existing device to make it a little bit faster, but you'll have to go these things and set it up. IMP also contains information about papers and so on, and the material that you have. And that, of course, is much more difficult because those tend to change much more quickly in your production environment. And for that, there is a provision to also import all of that information from CSV. So if you have an inventory system, for example, and you can export from that inventory system what you have in stock or what you have at the moment, then you can simply export that to CSV and import that CSV file into IMP. And both US and metric formats are supported while you're doing that. And again, for each of those materials that you have here, it allows you to set up all of the technical details that could influence the rest of the process. And I'll give you one example. There is here for the 80 grams, it says, for example, that the allowed fold depth is 4, so you can fold this 4 times. If you go look at 220, it's only 1. If you go look at 170, it's only 2. And that information, of course, will be taken into account when IMP tries to determine which signatures it can create for a particular product that you are doing. So again, having correct material information is very, very important. How you feed it is up to you. You can manually create new materials in here if you want, and new groups as well. But you can also, like I said, simply import that from a CSV file if you think that that is the quickest way to do it. So I wanted to detour to that configuration part because it is very important. And what I'm doing now with this plan is actually going to use that information. So what did I do? I actually, on this inner pages section, I clicked on edit, and that shows me what the signatures are that we have planned for this product, and there are none because it's something that I just imported. And have a look at this auto button that allows me to start the whole process. And process has a number of options that you can take. For example, grain direction here, that probably is not that important for bound. But it also, and that's maybe the most important part, it also has the machines that I want to support. So I could select a number of different machines here that I want to have supported for this particular product, and then I simply say, okay. And for bound jobs, this is really very fast. What it comes up with is a dialog that you already saw in the presentation as well, where it presents different options. And each time I select an option, you can see the signatures change. You can also see the different details change there. So normally the most cost-effective option is at the very start, and for that option it shows me total cost, and then it breaks it down into material, press cost, folding, then the press on which the solution would be printed, and how it will be assembled. So I have 4 signatures here sheet-wise, and then one of them will be work and turn. I can simply close that when I have the plan that I want, and I could go look at the details of what that actually is, so the layout. And if I zoom in for a second, you'll be able to see that the color bars have been placed automatically. The color bars will actually automatically also correspond to the colors that you really have in the job. There is a whole range of other marks that have been placed. I have, again, some color names here. I have probably the name of the products and materials at the bottom here. A whole range of marks that have been placed. And this has been done. I can still interfere with this, so I can still add additional marks, but this has been done simply by importing a particular or applying a particular marks template. And so you can create these templates once and then simply reuse the template that makes sense for a particular imposition, or you could make a number of different variants of a template, and then once you've created a plan, go in and apply the variant that you want as well. Okay, so that gives you a look at what happens here in the this file. I can still go back to the product as well. So if I click on the left here, I have a choice to switch between the plan and the different components that were used in that plan. So I could still go back and look at this and look at the signatures that were created, for example. I also still have the ability to, let's do this one first, I also still have the ability to look at the details of the product that I'm working with. And for example, you can see that this is a 130-gram coated paper. Now let me show you one of the things that I mentioned. If I would change this to 170, I get these exclamation marks. And the reason I get the exclamation mark is because Imp realizes that when you change the paper type in this at this point, then that paper can actually not be folded as many times as necessary for this particular signature layout. So it will keep these things into account, and if you do manual changes that conflict with something in the plan that you have already created, then it will warn you that that is the case as well. The other thing I can do now is I can go in and say add a PDF file in there, and for that I can go to there, add that PDF in there, and now if I go back to my plan, you'll see that I can now see these things. So let's look at the layout. I can now see that with all of the PDF information in there as well. Okay. Now, what I haven't shown is the database functionality. Like I said, it's a little bit difficult to do that if you're doing everything on one computer. It's typically something that you would use between departments, but it's actually very, very simple, and I can show you now. buttons at the top here. Well, check-in gives me the possibility to, for a particular, for this product that I'm working on, I can give this a job ID, I can give it a job name, and then say check-in. So it gives me the opportunity to simply store all of the information for this particular job in that database. And if I close the job that I'm working with, and then say checkout, I could go look for a webinar. And then I find again that thing that I put in there. And you can see that it remembered all of the details for the job. It remembered so all of the components that I had added. And you can see that it also remembered all of the details for the plan that I had calculated. If you imagine how this could be used between someone who is doing planning or a cost calculation for jobs, and how it could be done with a pre-press department, on the other hand, to create the actual imposition once you have the files and so on, then this gives you a way to communicate between those two departments. Now, what I'm going to do is close this job and move on to the next session, because I was told that there is some distortion on audio. Let me try and fix that while we're going back to the presentation. Okay. So hopefully that fixes that part as well. So that's what I wanted to show for these bound jobs. And I'm going to reopen the presentation for another 2 or 3 minutes. And I'm going to go through the same scenario for Diecut, but I'll go pretty quickly to demo again, because this is very, very similar. Diecut jobs, or jobs where you have die line information, are treated in a very similar way as bound jobs, except that what you start from in this case is always going to be a one-up with die line information. And you can see that if you import that into IMP, then it will show you what the die line looks like, and it will also show you all of the information, job information about special processes. It actually allows you, for example, to specify what area of that package in this case would be embossed, or would have braille, or would have foil applied, what type of foil. And those things are important because it will allow you to also take the cost of those finishing operations into account while you're doing the planning of that job. And when I say you, I mean IMP, of course, because again, the key here is that all of that is done in a very automated fashion. So all of that information is used to again come up with a plan that does a nesting for the label or the package that you're working with. And then once you've done that, you can create a report that has all of the details on there, including things like cutting length and creasing and perforation length, but also a split up, an actual split for what the cost, where the cost comes from for this particular job. So you have built-in reporting in there as well. You also have that for bound jobs, by the way. I didn't show that. I don't have time to show all of the details of the application, but you also have that on that side. And this I'm going to show you as well, because I think it's important. Remember that I said that you can store die information in that database, and that you can then use the database to find dies that either are a complete match or a partial match to what you're working with, and potentially decide that a die that doesn't match might still fit the bill if it's only the little dust covers that you have somewhere where there is some difference in the shape. But at least it allows you to store the information and find matching dies very, very quickly, and it's up to you to decide whether you want to reuse something or not. Other highlights, again, it automatically creates bleed if you're doing this. It can take no bleed zones into account, and I'll show that in a second. But you don't need to do manual bleed resolution. And what I mean by that is that if you create a PDF out of this, a fully imposed PDF again, that all of the bleed that you have, where these different iterations touch of that package, that all of that bleed resolution will be done automatically. And also, and that's kind of special, is that once you have done your planning, you can do both the imposition and the, or you can generate both what you need for the imposition process, or the print process if you want, and for the die cut information as well. You can export what is needed to go to print and what is needed to go to die preparation, all from Imp. No other software involved. It's a one package deal on that side as well. So let's go back. You can tell I have a preference for demos, but then if you've been to one of these webinars before, you already know that, of course. So what I want to do here is, we looked at bound jobs. I want to look at Diecut now, and in this case, I actually have a DXF file. What is supported is DXF, CF2, and actually also PDF, and we'll come back to that when we talk about ganging. But in this case, I have a DXF file, and so I'm going to start my product from DXF. This is the Diecut job, and that's my DXF file, and then simply going to open that. And the first thing it will do is ask me to identify the different layers I have in there. And this seems to be correct, so I am going to say OK. And then I have some job information where I'll maybe adjust the number of copies that I want, and then we're simply going to OK that as well. The screen that you see now is actually very similar to the screen that you had during the bound jobs presentation. You have bound components. I have none, of course, in this case. And then you have unbound components. And because this is unbound, it ends up in that category. I also have my material here. So I could change that here, or I can go to job details. And then I could still change the job information from here. And this gives me the paper types, for example. It also gives me, and that's what you could see in the presentation, it also gives me these special processes. So if I know that there is some embossing to be done, then I can specify what the square centimeters are in this case for embossing, and the cost of that will be taken into account when I do planning. So let me just OK that. And how do you plan this? Well, again, it's as simple as what we had on the bound job side. The only thing I have to do is click on Auto, and that shows me once more the different presses I want to use. So you can choose whatever you want here. But remark that it also allows me to choose, and all of these things are defined in the configuration setup again, but it also allows me to choose which die making setups I want to use, which die cutting setups. I can make them default so that Imp remembers that that is my my preference for this type of job. But all of that can be set up. And once you've set that up, the algorithm is determined automatically because I'm dealing with a die cut job. But once you've set all of that up, I can then go to planning. Now, let me go to options and verify that the grain direction here is actually taken into account, and then I'm going to say OK. Now this is going to take a little longer, of course, because it doesn't only have to look at the at the rectangular shape, but it looks at the nesting it can do for that type of job. And again, you end up with different possibilities on different sheet sizes, potentially on different presses. And of course, the more I go to the right here, well, the less productive this is going to be. And the most cost-effective one I have is, again, the first one in my list. Now you can see that there is a lot more information in here, and that's, of course, because I have these die-making processes and die cutting and all of that. And it shows me which of those was selected, what the cost of that is going to be. It shows me paper wastage, press, total cost, and so on. Now, let's say that I want to use this, but I know for a fact that there is a problem with Die Maker 2 at the moment, and I really am thinking of using another one because I have to. Well, I can manually switch that still in here, and then I immediately get the additional cost that that would add to my setups. You don't have that option for the actual press because the plans that are calculated here are for those different presses. So if I look at the press name, you'll see, and all of the ones I see here are the same, of course, but you'll see plans calculated for different presses in there. But if you change either die making or die cutting, then it will show me the additional costs necessary to make that manual change. So again, simply do what you want here and then finalize that. And again, that gives me a plan and it gives me a layout. Now, there is something that I did which is not correct, and you'll see it when I go to layout. And if I zoom in here, you'll see that this flap is actually a no bleed area. So I would like to have a single cut in here. Now the reason that that didn't happen is because, let me go back to my overview, and I'm going to remove the plan that I created. Remove, I said, thank you. And then if I go back to my product that I have, it looks a little bit confusing when I go back and forth between these, but the layout of the application is actually quite intuitive once you've worked with it for a little bit. You basically switch between the individual products that you have in the plan and then the plan itself. That's all I'm doing in here. And you can do that with these arrows that I used, or by going by using this left-hand side menu here to go between components and the plan. Now, in this product that I defined, I looked at the product properties. What I did not do is look at the product itself, at the die line. And this is the area that I was talking about. This is a glue flap. And what I can do is I can use one of the tools here to indicate this as a no bleed region. So I'm simply going to drag a rectangle across that. It doesn't need to completely match. I simply need to make sure that this area is indicated as a no bleed area, and then I'm going to very quickly go through the planning process again. I've only selected one press now to make it even easier for us. And then when I say done and we go to layout again, this time you'll see that it did indeed take that into account. And now when I zoom in, I have this no bleed area, this flap that is stuck against the other iterations of the package that I have there. So of course you still have to define the product correctly in order to see what you're doing there. Now, what I can do next is, if I go back to my product again for a second, I could also, in this case, add the actual PDFs that I want in in here, and I could do that in here, and then add a pick up a PDF file and add that to my layout. And once I've done that, if I go to layout here, once I've done that, I can then again, just as what I said for the bound jobs, I can export either a PDF file or a JDF and or the die line information that I want to work with. Okay, I see that time-wise I will have to be a little bit speedier than I am so far. So let me show you one last thing that I promised, and then we'll go look at ganging, which is also important. But before we go there, this is the original product that we imported, and it has this nice die shape that it imported from the DXF file in this case. Now, if I click here, then you can see search for similar geometry in database, right? There is also a button to submit the geometry to the database. So if I have imported something here, I can submit it to my database with dies, and then once I have, I'm working on a new product, I can go to search. I could say outline needs to match. I give it some tolerance, and then I say get matching jobs. And get matching jobs compares the die information. So it doesn't search by name or anything like that. It really, looks at the shape of the die, and it compares that to the dies I already saved in my database. And by doing that, I can decide to reuse one of those dies if I want to. Right, and in this case, I have a number of them that match. The more I up the tolerance here, the more of these that you'll see that are actually quite different. But like I said, if you have a die somewhere and the only difference is a little bit of this dust flap somewhere, for example, the shape of the dust flap, then you could still look at whether it makes sense to use the one that you already have and save some cost on there. This will show me what the difference is between the die that is in the database and the die that I have in the product. So I'll be able to see with those red and blue colors what the difference is between the two and judge whether it's close enough or not. This obviously would not be close enough, but that's because it shows up because my tolerance here is so high. Okay, so let me close this down and see at the next step. Now, I already saw a question about this, I think, and the answer is yes, and we'll go look at that. And that's the next part, and it's ganging. And ganging, well, you know what ganging is where we try to be efficient by placing multiple products on a single sheet. And this is supported in IMP, both for rectangular and for non-rectangular jobs. And the starting point typically is an import. And what I'll show you is two different imports from CSV. IMP supports multiple CSV formats, and you'll see why that is once I show them and show you what the possibilities are. But you typically start from a CSV file that is read. Products or components are created as you see in the screenshot, and then once those components are in IMP, it can start a planning process. And you could simply say add everything and then do an imposition, or I can select only those products that have the same material, for example, and IMP will take a whole lot of factors like material, number of requested copies, all of those things into account and come up with a number of sheets that are the most cost effective for what you are doing. And once you've done that, you can automatically import the PDF content from a folder, and it will use the information in the that it imported from the CSV, so the product information and the names of the PDF files in the folder that you specify, and automatically match them and import all of the PDF information, and that gives you these nice filled up sheets afterwards, where again you could still manually intervene. Perhaps it's necessary to manually move some of these around so that from a color point of view they're easier to deal with in offset, for example, but that is still possible. The important part here is that you start with a fully automated process to do the initial ganging. Okay, so let's see if we can get that done in the next 15 minutes. So what I'm going to start with is a ganging for a bound, for a rectangular job rather. And if I show you what I have here, well, what I have is a CSV file, and if I open that CSV, it contains a bunch of products. What it contains is the names for the products. I have then paper type, I have number of copies that I want, I have colors that I want in here, and so on and so on. So I define all of that in that CSV file. And then what I'm going to do in Imp is import that CSV. And they call that format2 CSV, something you have to know. Go to bound, CSV, open. And that, again, gives me the same screen as what I had before. I have the list of components, I have the plan, and of course, bound components I don't have in this case. It's all business cards and stuff like that in this particular example. So rectangular components. And the way I did this in the bound example is that I selected one of the components, and once I had selected that, I could then create a plan from that. Now, this time we want to make a plan that has a lot of different components. So I'm going to go about it differently. I'm going to create a plan manually. And then once I've done that, I'm going to select the product that I want, the components that I want in this particular plan, and then I have this nice plan button again. That's going to do most of the work automatically. Now, to do this, you can either add individual components here, or all of the components, or I could add by material. And let me select one particular material. And this will show you the shapes and so on if you want. I don't have PDF information for this yet. I could import that as well. But this shows me all of the components, or it added all of the components that have that particular material selected. And now I can go to plan, again select the equipment that I want, and then say OK. So it runs through the different options again, and you have different planning possibilities. I have a planning mode where it will calculate the first sheet, and then I can look at what I like the best. Then once I've made my decision, I can plan the next sheet with the remaining products. You also have planning modes where you say plan everything for me fully automatically. Once it has run through all of the options, same as before, I can see what these options are on the sheets. I can inspect the cost for each of those. And then once I've done that, I can say either next to continue planning with the things that haven't been planned in yet, or I can simply close this and go look at what I've done so far. Now, you'll notice that some of these components have gotten a blue 1 next to them. That's because they are now included. They have already been planned, and they've been planned on the first sheet that I have. The ones that don't have that number are components that haven't been planned yet. The ones that have been planned also have 2 numbers at their bottom. And the right-hand side number is the number of copies that was requested. The left-hand side is the number of copies that is actually going to be produced. And the ones that are coming up in red here, that means that I'm actually printing more copies of this component than what I had as a request in there. Now, it's a little bit hard to judge what I have here, so let me go back here and say auto assign the PDFs, and that will show you what it is still searching for. So everything is red, meaning it hasn't found any PDF files so far, and all we need to do is take it to the folder where I have stored all of these PDF files, say OK, and then you can see that all of a sudden all of these things turn blue, or green rather. It's warm here, you have to forgive me for my color blindness. And then I say assign, and that will import all of those PDF files, and I end up with the plan with those PDF files on it, or if I go to layout, I end up with, again, the full sheet the way it is. And then I could go, same as I could for Diecut jobs, I could go look at the actual PDF. That PDF allows me to preview what's going to be done for bleed. This is simply a transparency slider if you want. Nothing to do with the actual PDF that is generated. This is just a visual thing so that you can focus on the parts of the sheet that you want to see here. So once I've created the plans, the rest is exactly the same as for regular Diecut jobs. I can export a fully imposed PDF. I can export a JDF file from here, and either for impositioning or for cutting, or I can export the die line information again, and that can be done either in DXF, CF2, PDF, or HPGL formats. Okay, so that's a simple ganging for rectangular jobs. You import the jobs that you want, and you could do that import or that component process by either importing them, creating them one by one, or creating them from XML as I've shown before. But you can also, as I've shown here, import a CSV file. You can also create manual products if you want. That is a possibility as well. So you can create those products in all of the different ways. Once you've created a number of different components or you've imported them, you can create a new plan, an empty plan, and then you simply allow Imp to do the automated ganging of those components that you select into a number of different sheets. Okay, so one thing left, and the thing that is left is again ganging, but then die-cut ganging. And for this, I have a slightly different setup. In this case, I again have a CSV file, and I have a number of PDF files. So if I look at the CSV in this case, it's much simpler. It's what Imp calls a type 1 CSV. It sounds like a disease, but anyway. It's a type 1 CSV, and that only contains the names of the PDF files and the names of, or actually the quantities that you want produced for each of those. And the only thing I have to do again is a product from CSV, format 1, and then I can specify the file that I want, which is Diecut, this one. And again, I have the ability to specify what the cut lines and crease lines will be and so on, how much bleed I want, and then I say OK. And what I end up with, once more, it always follows the same procedure or paradigm, if you want. What I end up with, once more, is a list of bound and unbound components. This is die-cut job, so of course they're all unbound. And again, I end up with an empty plan here, nothing planned yet, because I simply imported components. Because I want to put all of them on the same sheet, I want to do ganging, I'm going to do the same thing as I did for rectangular jobs and simply create a new plan. Once I've created that new plan, I can do the same thing. I can say all, and that imports all of them. Now, if I click these open, you'll see job information already. You actually see what the PDF files look like. And this is, of course, because in the previous demo, I imported only the sizes of the jobs from the CSV. and then I didn't have the PDF files yet at that point. I associated those with the components afterwards, later in the process. What I did now in the CSV file is actually provide the names of the PDF files that I want to use with, that I want to work with. So those are available, and what is more, they're not only available, but I can actually, if I go look at one of them, I actually use them to get the outline information out of it and so on. So the die information is gotten from there as well. So returning to the plan, I selected all of the components, and well, you guess what's going to happen next is I'm simply going to hit plan. I can select a number of output devices again. The algorithm is again automatically irregular. I can select all the options that I want, and then I simply do OK. And IMP is again going through this ganging procedure. Of course, this is the most time-consuming of the different things that you can ask it, because in this case, you're actually ganging irregular shapes together on a wide variety of machines and material sizes. So it's taking all of those sheet sizes that you've defined for your presses. It's taking all of the press information and so on, and it's taking the PDF files and the die cut information from the PDF files, and then it's doing the imposition using all of that, or the ganging using all of that information. And once it's done, I can again go look at what that does. I can select an option, and I could either say next or simply accept this one. And again, you can see that some of these have a number next to them, so those have been planned. I have 3 of these products that have not been planned yet. And if I go to layout, similar to what you saw before, I have the information, all of the information here, and I can go to a PDF, to a JDF, or to a die line. Okay. That's it for the demo. I've seen that there are a number of questions that came in already. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to the presentation for a second and just put my email address on there in case there are questions that aren't answered here. Let me go over the questions and see if I have answers for that. One of them is there a configurator for Switch? No, there isn't a configurator for Switch yet, but IMP does come with, and I haven't focused on that in this webinar at all. I think it's enough of a topic to have a separate webinar on this. There actually is a solution called ImpFlow, which support hot folders and can automate many of the things that you've seen in this demo. And of course, anything that has hot folders can be integrated into something like Switch. So yes, it could be integrated into Switch through that hot folder solution. Does IMP support JDF? Stefan, I think I've already answered that largely. So you have all of the different ways you can create a file from, which is either CSV, XML, or for these other shapes, for these irregular shapes, you can also do that from a die cut in CF2 file format, or DXF or PDF. What I don't know is whether you can import something from a JDF file, but you can definitely, as you've seen, export to JDF and then use that JDF to feed it to to export that into a workflow system that will then do the action imposition, for example. Can IMP work with multiple existing die cuts to optimize the print runs for large amount of products? I'm not totally sure what you mean. We've talked about the ganging after you asked that question. Perhaps that answered some of the question that you had. If not, Menno, I would say write me a short email and we can talk about that afterwards. Should I always use an XML or CSF to describe products, or can I create them from scratch? Well, you can create an empty product and do everything from scratch if you want. But in practice, it is probably going to be easier and quicker to do it either from CSV or XML. But yes, you can create stuff from scratch. I've used XML and CSV here to show that it's possible, but also because it's much quicker during a demo. If you do any kind of integration with an MIS system or a workflow system, I would expect that in most cases you would want to take the information out of a CSV or an XML file as well. So can I gang bound and unbound products together? That's a very good question, and actually I don't know the answer to that one. I'll have to get back to you on that one, Vincent. And to the nice gentleman asking whether there are no penguins, no, I'm afraid this is a webinar without penguins. It's probably too hot for them out here. The webinar itself will be recorded. That's you again, Menno. The webinar again itself is being recorded actually, and as all of the other webinars, it will also be posted on our website, so you can definitely have a look at that afterwards. You're registered for the webinar itself, so you will also automatically get a mail afterwards once the webinar recording is online, and you can refer back to that afterwards. So no problem with no problem on that side. That's, I think, the last question that I see, which is perfect because it is 5 o'clock almost on the dot. So we did it in 1 hour exactly. If there are any other questions that you want to come back to, then of course don't hesitate to send those to us. You can either do that at the sales or info@4ps.com address, or support@4ps.com, or simply by sending me a quick email and requesting either a one-on-one or sending me a short question. There is demo software for Imp as well. We can help you in getting that going. And I've already mentioned that, but I'll say it again because it's important. The main problem the main thing you have to take care of when doing a demo is that the configuration that you have there, that configuration editor that you had, has to be filled out with information that is valid in your in your environment. If you don't put correct material and machine information in there, of course, you will also not get very good results from the automatic imposition or automatic ganging parts of the software. Okay. Thanks to all of you for showing up for yet another summer school webinar in this hot summer. As a practical note, the webinar for next week has been canceled. Those of you who were registered for that one should already have had a short note about that. It was a PDF chip webinar, but we had some practical difficulties with that. Mainly the fact that your presenter, that would be me, is leaving on vacation the day after, and I kind of overlooked the fact that that too has to be prepared in advance a little bit. So we've rescheduled that. You'll get a notification of that, but that will be somewhere during September. There are still 2 more summer school webinars. Those will be given by Tom. I don't know by heart what they are about. I think one of them is T-flow approval. The other one I would have to look. But those 2 are still on, and those are the last 2 Wednesdays from August, while I will be on vacation in Spain. But those still go on without any problem. It's just the one from next week that has been canceled. Thank you very much for joining. I wish you a great rest of the day and many cocktails in a sunny environment. And I'll speak to many of you again in September for a next webinar. Goodbye.